In Haiti, there's a very strong link between gender-based violence and economic empowerment. We're hoping to integrate economic empowerment as part of the response as support for survivors to help them generate an income and break the cycle of violence. What we found in conversations with women in camps is when we ask what their greatest concerns are, they articulate time and again that what they're hoping for is access to economic opportunities. And that would include as well vocational skills training and access to small loans, microfinance programs, and so on. And what we need to do is look at economic empowerment not just as part of a long-term strategy, but as something that we begin with from the onset of an emergency. It tends to be deferred until later, but it's something that women need right away to meet their basic daily needs and could help also break the cycle of violence.
I think initially the IMAGE program was really focusing on HIV/AIDS in South Africa, but we realized very early on that women's vulnerability to HIV was driven by things like poverty, gender inequalities, and violence. So that told us right away that we needed to integrate with the gender-based violence side of things and really try and tackle the two together. On the other hand, we also knew that addressing gender-based violence can be quite difficult. There's a lot of stigma, a lot of cultural beliefs, and a lot of resistance to talking about gender norms. And so in that sense, we started with HIV/AIDS as an entry point because there was a lot of legitimacy to it. People understood the impact of AIDS in their communities. They were ready to talk about it probably a bit more sooner than they were willing to talk about domestic violence. The poverty side was really just the basic practicalities of people's lives, and we saw microfinance as an entry point to really get to communities to talk about issues like HIV and violence because they were more interested in earning incomes and really trying to improve their lives in very practical ways.
We within the Food and Agriculture Organization realized that GBV has a very direct correlation with the challenges of food security, income security, and in livelihoods in general. So we would feel that the best entry point would be in addressing the underlying livelihood challenges, and would take livelihoods as the best entry point to enable us address the problem of GBV. Because when you look at GBV, the causes are very, very much related to a household's inability to meet its daily needs. And addressing that would be a proxy to addressing the aspects to do with GBV. We may not tackle the subject as directly as GBV, but if you address the household livelihoods, the household income, the household food security, then ultimately you would be contributing to the overarching objective of addressing GBV.
Studies have shown us that poverty is strongly associated with gender-based violence, so that across many countries we find that among the poor, while gender-based violence is a phenomenon that occurs across all strata, across all ethnic groups, across all classes, that there is a higher incidence of gender-based violence among the poor. This is a reflection of the kind of tremendous inequality that exists in poor households and in poor communities. So while gender-based violence is associated with poverty, there is also a significant impact that gender-based violence has on poverty. So poverty impacts gender-based violence, and gender-based violence impacts poverty.
It's extremely important to ensure that we integrate gender in MDG 3 and 5 because the MDGs need to sit within a human rights framework. Rights cannot be indivisible. They are universal, and you see civil and political rights with economic, social, and cultural rights. And once you see them together, and you see poverty that sits at the center, and most people who are poor are women. And that's the reason why MDGs and gender and human rights actually sit together. They're part of the same structure. It's important, again, for human rights to sit at the core of that because this is a human rights issue.
To address the issue of hunger without necessarily addressing gender-based violence, in my opinion, it's not possible. Sometimes other programs have done it, but I would say that's why somehow, somewhere, a lot of programs have not yielded the intended result, because gender-based violence is enshrined in, is contributing so much to poverty and hunger. And again, at the same time, poverty and hunger are also contributing greatly to gender-based violence. And these are the things we need to be paying attention to, because for instance, in the food insecurity situations, you find that women like have had to make a lot of sacrifices. They have had to undergo a lot of violences. They experience a lot of violence because they don't have food at home. They go out there, they go and sell their bodies just to get money to buy food, for instance. Where they go to line up to queue for maize, like in my country, because when there's scarcity of maize, people have to queue long queues for them to have access to maize. So sometimes the people who sell maize, people who are entrusted with the responsibility to sell maize, they take advantage of that, and they ask sexual favors from the women, knowing how vulnerable they are in those situations. So the two cannot be separated, in my opinion. They have to be dealt with together.
Women not having access to basic services, not having access to healthcare, not having a voice is a violation of human rights. And whilst we try to find a solution to this within the MDG framework, we also need to look at it that states have an accountability. They have signed up to conventions, they have signed up to international mechanisms, and they need to be held accountable. And that's the reason why we would argue that it's important for us to see human rights sitting at the center and sitting as part of the framework of the MDG debate itself. I think in addition to that, this process opens up the space for women to have access to justice mechanisms, hold their governments to account, and be involved in decision-making processes. The whole debate around participation, of actually getting women's voices heard on decisions and on policies that actually have an impact on their own lives. I think we need to ensure that that's an integral element of the MDG framework. And once we get that, once we have that, we would see systems shifting. We would see governments being held to account. And I think that's the reason why we would make this the center.
How does gender-based violence impact poverty? First is that gender-based violence leads to a drain on the household economy, so that when an incident of violence occurs, women have to access services to meet for some of the consequences of violence. So in a study that we did in Uganda, we found that actually households were spending $5 or roughly 3/4 of their weekly income to access services to deal with the consequences of violence. That's a huge drain for a poor household.
From the public health point of view, it became apparent early on that we didn't have all the tools we needed to do this kind of broader approach. My background is as a doctor, and I could see that working in the clinics and the hospitals, we weren't addressing the economic aspects or the gender aspects. So it was actually a conversation around a tree with people who are working in the livelihood side of things, the microfinance program, that we started to brainstorm about how we could bring these two together. And so it's really, it was kind of an approach to finding out more about this field, getting to know microfinance organizations, working to develop those relationships, and then coming together for an integrated program intervention.
I think isolating GBV from the broader development perspective is a dangerous thing. So we would prefer tackling the preventive aspects other than waiting for GBV to occur and then you come back to address the subsequent effects. So we would like to reduce on the cost of GBV by addressing the underlying causes, and we feel that strongly if we addressed all these challenges, then we shall minimize on the physical effects of GBV in the households, because it's an issue of money in the house, an issue of food in the house that really necessitates intervention to reduce on the GBV.
I think it's essential to engage men in our efforts to prevent and respond to gender-based violence. Men are absolutely part of the solution, and I think that we tend to neglect them or to treat them as perpetrators, and therefore women as victims. And I think that does a disservice to both women and men. And it's possible to progress with men and to work with men in their own right. And I think in doing so, specifically in getting their buy-in from the onset of any aid interventions, things work better for women. So women will benefit, and men as well. And I think it's possible to work towards true gender equality. The risk of not doing so is sidelining and marginalizing men, and it could result in a backlash against the gains that have been made for women. So at the end of the day, we're doing women and obviously men a serious disservice if we don't look at gender issues in the robust sense of the word.
Gender-based violence also impacts upon the quality of life. People are unable to work, especially women are unable to work, and men often also do not work after a very serious incidence of violence. So that loss of income then means that there is less to spend on food, which directly impacts on food security. It means that households have less money to maybe spend on children's education, which is then a long-term impact because it undermines the human capital formation of the next generation. So in that way, also gender-based violence can undermine the survival of a household, poor household. And gender-based violence also impacts on the ability of women to do reproductive work, the care work that is essential for the survival of a household. So in all these ways, gender-based violence can in fact increase the poverty of the household. So gender-based violence and poverty are caught in a vicious downward spiral. Poverty leads to gender-based violence exacerbates poverty. And so we need to address this central link or the spiral if we're to realize the MDG Goal 1, which is about having the number of people experiencing extreme poverty.
The issue is that GBV is multifaceted, and there is no single agency that has all the all-round competences in addressing GBV. So if we are to do a good job as development partners, as practitioners, it's important we begin by understanding where do we have a comparative advantage so that we complement each other's programs. This calls for joint programming, where each agency has its role in playing. And for us within the Uganda program and in East Africa in general, we are approaching GBV from the point of addressing livelihoods through farmer field schools, because the farmer field schools provide a platform where different stakeholders can integrate in a holistic manner all the necessary livelihood aspects. We may be addressing aspects to do with food security, but it's not only food security that is the message that the communities require. They may be requiring counseling, and within the field schools, because the field schools are season-long fora where farmers meet on a regular basis, then there is an opportunity of integrating everything beyond livelihoods. So we hope that and are very sure that within the field schools and life schools, we are able to provide a platform where all the partners can holistically bring the right message to the communities.
Some of the commitments concerning investment is to make to deliver effective programming around gender-based violence is to ensure that there is enough evidence through research that needs to be done to understand the causes, underlying causes of gender-based violence. Again, not only just the causes, but the impact of gender-based violence in the communities. Apart from that, Concern UNFESO needs to allocate adequate resources to gender-based violence programming, because we have seen a lot of programs that have not yielded that much because of lack of resources and financial commitment from organizations.
When working on gender-based violence, I think the most important thing that donors need to keep in mind is that it's not a quick fix. It is not an easy solution. It can't quickly be measured. It needs long-term sustained support. It needs the concerted effort of a broad range of stakeholders across a lot of sectors. It involves education, health, it's about economic issues, it's about human rights. There are so many different integrated ways to look at gender-based violence and trying to prevent it. It's about social change, so those things can't be measured in the short term, and it is about the ways that communities, and especially women, define the pace and the processes of social change and how they hope to be empowered. So it's really about empowering women in the ways that they understand empowerment to be.
I think the things that we're addressing can't be changed in a month or in a year or so. And so donors have to be willing to fund programs and to fund evaluation that's going to look at things over the longer term. I think part of the way that they can do that in this climate of constrained resources is to build networks and partnerships with other donor agencies so that they can pool their resources and invest over a longer period of time. I think another major recommendation for donors also is not to always chase after the next innovation or the next shiny new toy, because often it means staying with something that may not be as sexy as a new technical innovation, but staying with communities over time that's going to bring the benefits in the long term.
Donors have to recognize that they need to take a critical eye on the design of interventions. How are they more integrated and are multi-sectoral? And this lack of actual attention to that is reflected in something that happened very recently, which was this comprehensive framework for action, which was developed by a high-level task force on the global food insecurity or global food security as an issue. That report, or the framework that was developed, had no mention of gender-based violence, and it limited its mention of gender as just one element or one additional risk factor. So we should make sure that interventions address age, gender, race, ethnicity. That's not enough. And if high-level committees, if international donors still view that these two issues are somehow different and can be dealt with in different places, in different ways, they will never achieve the Millennium Goal Development 1.
Because of the long-term nature of interventions, there is a need for sustainable resources in terms of financing. And then also, it's important that we place GBV within a broader context, other than isolating it as a specific intervention in its own. The other aspect is to ensure that there is good joint programming.
One of the most important things that I learned, not in Haiti, but in my time in Afghanistan, came from an Afghan man, actually, who said to me, the world thought they could bring freedom to Afghan women, but freedom is only won from the inside. And I think that's one of the most important messages to take away, that it is really about the context and the community and their ways of defining the goals and how they hope to be empowered.